Hi there, I'm Emily with Embroidery Library, and today I'm going to show you how to do edge-to-edge quilting designs. These designs are special because you can use the embroidery machine to quilt across the surface of your fabric much like you would with a long-arm quilting machine. Now with these designs, you're going to line up the beginning of one design to the end of the previous one, making one nice continuous line. Keep watching for our best tips and tricks on how to do these designs precisely. And if you'd prefer to have written instructions, we have those linked below in the description so you can follow along at your own pace. All right, let's get started. First, you want to choose an embroidery design that matches your project. For this one, we've chosen a bee to go with this honeycomb pillow, or you can choose something neutral like this feather design for this quilt top. Make sure the design you choose is a bit smaller than the hoop so that you have room to line it up and make sure that it's precise. For this project, we're using a low loft cotton batting. You can use whatever type of batting you prefer, but we found that it's a little easier to hoop your quilt and line up your design with this lower loft versus a high loft. And we like the cotton batting because it shifts and bunches a little bit less than the polyester. For this mini quilt, we've already constructed our quilt top. We're then going to cut our batting just a little bit bigger than this and our backing quite a bit bigger. The easiest way to calculate how much back fabric you'll need is to print out a paper template of the design. Once you've printed this out, make sure that it's the accurate size. Then you're going to want to cut as close as you can around the design so that it's easier to place it later. Next, lay out your quilt, take your paper template and position it, and make sure that your design is off the edge of the quilt. You're then going to take your hoop and position that over the design, and we're trying to make sure that we line up the design. You're also going to want to make sure that you've got enough back fabric so that there's plenty of room when you hoop the design. Once you have all your layers, use temporary spray adhesive to attach them together. We recommend doing this instead of using pins because pins can make it more likely that the layers will shift or bunch up, and they can get in the way of hooping the fabric. We also recommend using quilter's tape or masking tape to tape down the edge of the batting and the edge of the quilt top. This will help prevent your presser foot from getting caught under the edges while your design is stitching. Now it's time to mark the placement of your embroidery designs. You can print off multiple paper templates so that you can lay your designs out end to end, so you get a rough idea of where you want your designs to stitch. And remember that your designs can go over the edge of the quilt so that you're covering the entire surface. Now let's mark the placement of our designs on the fabric. We'll be doing this in rows, starting at the center and working our way out towards the edges. Starting in the middle like this will help prevent the layers from shifting and bunching while you're stitching the whole quilt. These designs stitch from left to right, so you'll want to continue stitching left to right on each row before you move on to the next row. Poke a hole in the exact center point of your paper template. Then use an air erase marker to mark the center point and the axis lines. Then use a ruler to extend those lines. It's best to only position and mark one design at a time so you can adapt if any minor shifting does happen. Line up the marks on your fabric with the marks on your hoop, and hoop all the layers of your quilt together. Make sure the fabric is hooped nice and tight like a drum, but don't stretch it. Some people like to use a magnetic hoop if there's one available for your machine. This can make it easy to unhoop and rehoop over and over. We've found that it can be helpful to double check your placement to make sure everything is lined up. Any regular embroidery or quilting thread will work for these designs. You can choose a thread that matches your fabric or a contrasting color if you want to be more decorative. You'll also wind a bobbin with the same color as your top thread. And we also recommend using a 7511 sharp sewing needle for quilting with embroidery. Let's start the embroidery. Load the embroidery design into your machine and attach the hoop. Move the needle so it's exactly over the center point that you marked on your fabric. Start the machine and embroider the design. After the design is done stitching, take the hoop off the machine and unhoop your quilt. Take your template and line up the beginning of the design in the template with the end of the previous design like this. Use your air erase marker to mark the center and axis points like you did before. Hoop up your quilt again, put it back on the machine, and position the needle over the center point like you did the last time. Before we start stitching the second design, let's make sure it lines up exactly with the first. In your embroidery machine's menu, move forward 1 stitch in the design so that the machine moves the needle to where the first stitch will sew. Lower the needle into the fabric and make sure it's lined up with the end of the previous design. If it's not, raise the needle, move back 1 stitch to get to the center point, and adjust the position. Then move forward 1 stitch and try again. Keep testing and adjusting until you get the beginning of the new design lined up with the end of the old one. If you have an embroidery machine that can scan your hoop to help with positioning, this can be a great way to line up your design. This machine can also project an image of the design onto the fabric, which lets you know exactly where the design will go. Once your design is lined up, start the machine and let it stitch out. Keep repeating designs until you've stitched across the whole row and your quilt looks something like this. Now it's time to start the next row. Starting on the left, use a paper template and air erase marker to mark the placement of your design. Make sure this design is close to the row above it, but not overlapping. Make sure it's lined up straight so your rows will be parallel. Hoop up your quilt and stitch the design. For the first design of any row, you don't need to worry about lining up the start and end points. Just move your needle over the center point and embroider. Continue stitching the second row just like you did the first, making sure that you line up the beginning of the next design with the end of the previous one. Keep on adding rows of embroidery until you've covered the whole surface of your quilt. After your embroidery is done, you can finish off your project as you normally would. For this mini quilt, we're trimming off the excess fabric. As long as you're sewing over the edge that's cut off like we did with this binding, your stitching will be nice and secure. These designs aren't just for patchwork quilts. You can also use them for other projects like this honeycomb pillow. Or you can use them with a solid fabric like we did with this stocking and with this tote. Or you can use them without batting just to decorate fabric or create texture like we did with this blanket and the cuff of this stocking. We hope you found this video helpful. Be sure to check out our website for lots of different edge-to-edge quilting designs. We'll put a link to those below in the description. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can be the first to know about the latest machine embroidery videos.